Hey guys, I'm Ashley Horsfall and I write for Getting Through Tough Times on HealthyPlace. And today I wanted to talk to you about 3 techniques I use to cope with anxiety or fear associated with death or dying. I am a huge true crime fan. I listen to podcasts, I read true crime books, I watch documentaries, I soak it all up as much as I possibly can. And yet at the same time, I have this terrible fear of dying all the time. I mean, it doesn't, it's not something I obsess over, but it is something that I consider at least a couple times a day, probably more. But thankfully, with a few techniques, I've been able to kind of cut back the intense anxiety I used to have, and now it's sort of fleeting. So the first technique I use is to get to the bottom of the facts. If I'm going to go on a road trip, I will just think about the worst case scenario and how many car accidents occur each day, and I'll read news about car accidents, and it's so easy to absorb all of that and feel really scared about, leaving the house and getting in the car. So instead I try to think about how many people are actually on the road and what percentage of people actually get into accidents and how many people get into fatal accidents. And I try to talk myself into, considering every aspect of the statistics. Like, my car is safe. I'm a safe driver. I have to be aware on the road, but, chances are I will arrive at my destination just fine. I also might use this to, think about something like the fear of being kidnapped while I'm running. I have to consider, the obvious safety concerns, but at the same time, I also think, well, it's not very likely that it's going to happen. I also think about being more mindful, which leads me to my second technique, which is, just try to find a way that brings you more awareness about what's going on. A lot of the times when I'm feeling anxious about, death or dying, it's actually something, related to something totally unrelated to that. So I need to find a way to ground myself, which I've found exercising really does that for me. When I go for a run, I'm not thinking about all these terrible things that could happen. When I'm, stretching out, I try to focus on the breathing aspect of it. And some people are really able to do that with meditation or breathing exercises or saying like a special thing to like a sentence, an affirmation to themselves. Something like that can kind of take your mind off of anxiety, especially when it's about something as like tremendous and oppressive as death. And then finally, my third technique is to just go out and do things that I'm afraid of. Obviously, nothing too dangerous. I'm not into jumping off of cliffs or bungee jumping or anything like that, but the most basic things that I might be afraid of, I do try to conquer them, including, traveling by myself or going on road trips. So I found all of those things to be really helpful. But I would love to hear from you about what techniques you use to cope with the fear of dying or death or something else that feels just as oppressive in your life.